So I just finished reading The Fellowship of the Ring for the first time in my life at the ripe age of 33 years old. Actually, 34 now. My birthday was just a few days ago. I mean, if you want to throw some money as a birthday gift, as a donation for the video, I pretty much just became a man by Hobbit standards. So now I just have 16 more years before I can make my journey to Mordor to throw my ring into the fire. Anyway, having just finished reading Lord of the Rings for the first time and publishing over 10 hours of video essays on the work, I think I am a certified expert in this text now. I'm just kidding. Please don't come after me, please. But I do think I have something to offer people who have yet to read this book. And for those of you who have, you just get to sit back and enjoy me dote on this book for a few minutes. And let me know in the comments below what other reasons you'd add to my list. Now, one of the reasons why I want to make this video is because I, like many of you, were a bit intimidated by reading Lord of the Rings. I read The Hobbit in high school and loved it. That was actually one of the two books that made me realize that reading was fun and kind of amazing. The other was To Kill a Mockingbird, or as my friend calls it, How to Kill a Mockingbird. But after I finished The Hobbit and after loving the movies of The Lord of the Rings, and after proclaiming myself a reader in high school after liking two books, I decided to crack open the well-worn copy that my family had and give it a chance. Then I got hit by a ton of bricks, or actually a ton of pipeweed. Why was the first 20 pages all about pipeweed and the history of hobbits? Where's the actual story? Okay, maybe that's just a few pages, I thought. So I plodded through onto the first chapter where Bilbo is planning his birthday. I remember thinking at the time that it was okay, it was good enough to keep reading, but I was just a smidge bored at the time. I was hoping it was going to be much more adventurous like the movie, which, side note, it's a fascinating deep dive into the difference between the tone of the book versus the movie. The movie is more like an action, war, drama kind of thing. The book is a philosophical story that is about the journey of these characters and the history of these events. It's absolutely the most epic modern story that we have. But after getting around to the place where Frodo sells Bag End in the book, I kind of called it quits. I never picked it up again. And some things that should not have been forgotten were lost. History became legend. Legend became myth. And for 2,500 years, well, about 15 in this case, the book passed out of all knowledge. Until when chance came, it ensnared a new bearer. That new bearer was just an older version of myself. Someone who was ready to read these books, someone who was patient and didn't need to read super fast in order to get a lot of books under my belt where I could say, oh, I've read all these books. You see, when I started reading, I just kind of felt behind, so I felt like I needed to read a ton of books super fast. And I just kind of sped through some of these classic works. It honestly wasn't that bad, and I kind of came into contact with some fantastic literature. But all in all, I would not recommend that kind of reading. Now I have zero shame in what I read, and I just read anything that's in front of me. When I go to a bookstore, the first place I go to is the children's section and read the picture books. I'm obsessed with a good picture book, and I could talk about them for hours. My obsession with children's picture books knows no ends. Everyone needs to go read The Fate of Fausto, by the way, one of the greatest books ever written. But I think when I picked up Lord of the Rings again, specifically The Fellowship of the Ring for the first time in over 15 years, I just kind of felt ready to read it. I had, a few months before, attempted to listen to it via audiobook and just could not do it. I have a problem with audiobooks because I cannot focus enough to get the details. And I think for Tolkien, the devil, or in this case maybe the Hobbit, is in the details. He prides and delights himself in the language and the detail of the story. And so I put down the audiobook and picked up a physical copy of this book. And it was simultaneously the most epic, in-depth thing that I've ever read, and also the most approachable book that I ever cracked open. It felt like J.R.R. was just sitting by my side reading the text to me. And so now, after reading it and thinking about it from a first-timer perspective, I think this is one of the greatest books that I've ever read. And I want to talk about it just for a few minutes about why you should read it too. I've got 9 reasons, for the Fellowship. And a bit of the how you should read it as well. I want to talk about how you should actually read through The Lord of the Rings. Not that I'm an expert in it, but let's start. Reason number 1. It's just a legendary beginning. Now, I think Tolkien fans who are truly Tolkien fans are going to fight me on this one, but I feel like The Hobbit is probably the best starting place for the Tolkien Legendarium, which I think isn't going to be that much of an issue. I think most people are going to agree with me on that. But I think the real beginning is Fellowship of the Ring. It's actually ludicrous that I'm saying this with such surety, seeing that I've only read Fellowship of the Ring. But I don't know, the whole start of the book just feels like the beginning of an epic story. The whole tone feels very light, but also like there's something looming that is vitally important just on the next page. And every single time you turn the page, you just have the potential to be as excited because the secret might be on the page after that. It just feels very hopeful and tense reading the book because I don't know anything. And Tolkien assumes a smart audience, so he just throws you into the story but also kind of holds your hand through the beginning of it with brilliant and established characters and setting. I love even the maps of the world, and I love how he made these maps, but I think I could, even without the maps, just have pictured it all in my head from the beginning of this story, which leads me into the second point. Tolkien's deep world building. I have to say, I knew the world building of Tolkien was going to be impressive because I've heard a ton about it from friends and fans of his work, but I did not know that it was going to be that immersive. One qualm that I sometimes have with other books that I've read is that they just seem to introduce characters, and it feels like those characters are either just there to serve the story or that they have no history or background. They are almost blank slates to some extent, and that was the last thing that I felt with Tolkien. And I think this points to his building out the history of this place as the first thing that he really did. When I read this book, it felt like each character was a full person already. Like I was just watching them interact and grow from each other. But it felt like a world, which is silly because the books are all about this world building. But I think for Tolkien, the world already existed and he just kind of gave us like a bird's eye window view into how all this is happening. I feel like there isn't a farmer or an orc who Tolkien didn't have a full backstory and history of. One of the best examples of this is early on in the books when they meet Gildor, the elf. He just kind of passes by the three hobbits with some other elves, and they're kind of living their own life with all their own worries and cares. But the elf just seems to have his own concerns in his own life. He's not really in the story to serve Frodo or to help him grow. For me, it honestly just feels like it was a real life happenstance where they bumped into each other and just got to chat. I could even imagine Tolkien writing this almost surprised himself that these characters ran into each other in this world, which is honestly maybe the best built world that I have ever encountered. I could talk more about the languages and the cultures and the aura of even the races that are featured in this book, even the feeling of the different towns and the superstitions and the beliefs that they have where they're based in Middle-earth. But it is such a full and expansive world, which makes me very excited to keep going into the stories that he tells. Number 3 is about the timeless themes. This was something that I knew I was going to encounter, but I didn't know how deeply it would affect me. I knew Tolkien threw some of his own wisdom in there, but I did not expect the wisdom to stick so closely to me. I could quote maybe 10 to 20 beautiful lines of writing that Tolkien wrote just from how much it impacted me. I think of Gildor talking about not giving advice and how it's a dangerous thing. I think about Merry telling Frodo about his loyalty to him and how he's going to be at his side when he goes to Rivendell and then destroys the ring. I think of Gimli and Elrond having a battle over oaths and being loyal to their company. I even think of the obviously popular ones in the movies where Gandalf talks to Frodo about pity or time. I think a huge reason that you should read this book is not only because the wisdom of Tolkien is on full display, but the themes are universal themes. Yes, it's a story about a ring, obviously, but it's not. It's a story about friendship and love and loyalty and bravery and gardening and honor and 1,000 other things that Tolkien does that show he's a master at incorporating these into his works without it feeling heavy-handed. Number 4, the Fellowship itself. The diverse group, hobbits, men, an elf, a dwarf, and a wizard, offer dynamic interactions, cultural clashes, and camaraderie that just shape the journeys and keep the thing interesting. I think this also plays into the idea that I just talked about with universal themes, but when the Fellowship just begins their journey. You can sense the nerves and the tensions within the company. But when they get to Moria, it feels like Gimli steps up to the plate. And if you want, you can go back and watch my essays on this chapter because it had me enamored with Gimli and the history of the dwarves. It's a text that drives you into deeper curiosity about the world. And for me, if a book drives me to learn more about history or even a fantasy realm that isn't real and that I just want to know more about, I think that is the thing I look for most in a good book. I remember reading the Poisonwood Bible and being obsessed with the Congo for a few months, and the unrest that the land had because of colonization and King Leopold's gold lust, which was terrifying and horrific. The same thing with Middlesex, and learning about the fires in Greece and what Detroit was like as it was becoming a great city. A book that drives me to learn and become obsessed over these little facts and details is a good book. And Tolkien's work delivers on such a high level that it's actually absurd. Number 5, Bill the Pony. I wrote an essay on this, and Sam and Bill's little love that they have for each other, which was one of my favorite moments in all of book 1. But I think this point is more so about the characters. I found it so fascinating that in the comments of most of my videos, how people love certain characters more than others. I find myself in love with Gimli, as a lot of people are, and Boromir, who's a little bit more of a controversial character. I didn't find myself super interested in Aragorn, which for some of you are devastated about, but I think I'll grow in my love for him, and I think I'll grow in my love of other characters and disdain for certain characters as I keep reading. But this story is like a buffet of characters that you can choose from as to who is your favorite and who you can relate to most. A lot of other books I read just have kind of 1 or 2 characters that are likable. I feel like you can almost love anyone you encounter in the first Lord of the Rings book. Except for Bill Ferny, who mistreats Bill the Pony. No one should like him. Number 6, it's more than just the movies. This is like a dumb and obvious point, but for me, someone who came from the movies, and for me, someone who knows that the book is always better than the movie and always has more detail, I just cannot believe how long it took for me to get to these books finally. I knew they were going to be different, but goodness gracious, these books have so much detail and purpose and fun to them. I loved every chapter for the journey it was taking me on, and I found myself so interested in each of the characters in a different way than I did in the movies. But this is where my biggest point of how you should read the books kind of comes in. In the movies, you don't have to have a ton of patience. The payoffs are there within like 4 hours of the extended edition. If you want to speed through this book, you're welcome to do that, but I think reading is much better if you are patient and slow. If you are reading not just to check books off your list, but rather just to enjoy them. A friend of mine read the entire Harry Potter series in 2 days, just casually, and she said she thought they were okay, but not great. She reread them again a few years later and took her time, and she came back in love with the series. I think when you are patient with books, and more so patient with yourself for books, it becomes a much more enjoyable reading experience. If you read a page and totally forget everything that you just read, just reread it. And don't beat yourself up. If you don't understand something that happened on the page, just reread it. I cannot tell you the amount of times that I reread the Mirror of Galadriel section. It was 8 times I reread that section. There are just 3 or 4 pages in that chapter that confused me, and I needed to reread to try to understand it. Make reading fun, not a chore. Anyway, reason 7 goes against my last point a little bit, but number 7 is because it is a cultural touchstone. Read these books because they are classics. If you like fantasy, I doubt that you haven't read Lord of the Rings, but there are so many books, games, and films that have been influenced by Tolkien. Reading The Fellowship of the Ring helps you see the origin of countless fantasy tropes. Even books like Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. He said that he wrote that because he had an idea of what if Sauron won. These authors are all inspired by this work. And so while the primary reason to read this is really for your own enjoyment, you should also read them because they are classics for a reason. They are phenomenal books because millions of people on this earth have read them and have come to love them. And that bodes well for millions of people who haven't. Read the work of Tolkien. Number 8, it sparks imagination. Tolkien's prose is poetic and descriptive, often painting pictures with words in a way that lets your imagination roam free. In an interview with Malcolm Guite, the wizard from YouTube himself, he talks about this and why you should read the books. And he says, if you like the movies, you should read the books because essentially your imagination can run wild with these books. And perhaps some of the characters and settings and adventures will be significantly better in your head than they are in the film. And I have to say, I think the little man who is directing the movie that is going on in my head as I am reading Lord of the Rings is a better movie director than Peter Jackson. And I love Peter Jackson so much. But in thanks to Tolkien for that, because the language that he uses to describe things and to paint pictures and let you see the world just fills my mind so beautifully. It's an absolute journey every single time that I open a page of this book, and I find myself giddy every time I even look at the books, knowing that I will get to spend just a few hours with that book, and that soon I will get to read the story and get lost in my imagination. And number 9, it's a journey that you'll remember. You know, sometimes it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Blah, blah, blah. I hate cliche, but sometimes it's just so stinking true. One of the reasons you should read this book is because it is just a beautiful journey of discovery. Not only for these characters and for our own enjoyment, but also for the forming of my own character. I find myself unable to not think about some of the things that are happening in these books. I find myself becoming a better friend because I am learning lessons from the Fellowship. I find myself becoming braver because of the things that I read about Aragorn or Boromir, and I find myself hugging my dog Wesley even harder now after I see Bill and Sam and how they love and understand each other. From the peaceful Shire to the dark mines of Moria, every chapter adds a new layer to the adventure. It's not just about getting to Mordor. It's about every step along the way. And I know that was a cheesy last point, but I cannot wait to keep reading. So follow the journey and make sure you subscribe to the channel in order to follow my journey through reading Lord of the Rings for the first time. Make sure you like the video, become a member, and I will see you in the next one.